Praise to you, O Christ. I am not an expert in biology and microbes and all those sorts of things, but I do know that parasites are organisms that attach themselves to other organisms and feed off them, generally to the detriment of the host organism. It's not a voluntary thing, right? The parasite attaches to itself and it takes and takes and takes and does not give. It may not be beneficial for the parasite to take everything because then the host may not live on, right, for the parasite to continue to take. But it's that kind of a relationship where the host is expected to give and give and give, and then even maybe when there's nothing left to even give some more. Parasites are life-taking sorts of creatures. As we come to today's gospel, Jesus seems to be giving and giving and giving, and do not hear me saying, because I'm not saying that the people around Jesus were parasites that were taking and taking, but I do think that in this story where Jesus has a whole city gathered around the door, where he goes and takes some time to pray, and where there are always more people seeking help, I do think this story can teach us a little bit about the busyness in our culture and a particular parasite that I think we live with. Now, it's not an organism that attaches itself to us, but I would suggest to you today that our collective culture's focus on productivity is a parasite, that there's this parasite of productivity that is constantly asking us to give and give and give and give, and when we don't think we have anything left, to give some more. It's all around us, right? We measure it. If you turn on the news, at some point you'll hear talk of the gross domestic product, which is like what we produce. If you listen to business reports, sooner or later you'll hear somebody talk about productivity gains. Sometimes that may mean that we have figured out how to do jobs more efficiently, but sometimes I think it means that we've laid off a few people and expect the ones that are remaining to keep doing more work, right? To do all the work that more people used to do, so that they then are suddenly now more productive. I would bet that many of us have at some point skipped a date with our partner because there was more work to do, or missed a performance, a recital, or a game for one of your children because there was more work to do. Or maybe you said no to a social gathering, or put off a vacation, or otherwise delayed some part of life outside of work because there was always more productive work that needed to be done. It happens all the time, right? We give and we give and we give to this thing that expects production from us, and we measure that production in all kinds of ways. I had a conversation with someone this week who used to be on a team that was quite a bit bigger. They got rid of 4/5 of the team, right? It used to be 5 times bigger than it is now. And that person has just as much work. It's different work in a pandemic. In many ways, it is much harder work, and there's fewer people trying to do all of that work. And what that means is this person is struggling to be productive, feeling like customers are being let down, that they're not living up to the expectations, and then feeling guilty that they aren't being as productive as they used to feel like they were. Now, forget about the fact that they didn't reduce the size of the team. They didn't create the pandemic. There's nothing about all of this work that they created for themselves, and yet they're the ones that carry the guilt for not being productive enough, right? This parasite of productivity will take and take and take life from us and not give us back, right, any affirmation or energy or any sense of things that are life-giving. Now, it might be sometimes that we do have a job well done and we do have some benefits in way of compensation and some other things, but generally this parasite of productivity just takes and takes and takes. I've had conversations with a few people in this congregation who in this time of pandemic still have their jobs but are doing them from home, and where their workday used to be bounded by the time they were at work, it now starts earlier and goes later because at home they can just keep working and there is always more work to do. But it's not just about employment. How many of us have sat down at home to maybe take a few minutes to relax, read a book, have a cup of tea, but then said, oh gosh, I should probably be doing the laundry. Or maybe I should be getting those dishes cleaned up. Or maybe I should be exercising, or maybe I should be doing the taxes or paying the bills, or fill in the blank of the many, many things that we constantly get pulled to because there is always something to do. And when we aren't productive, we can maybe even start to feel guilty. And sometimes that parasite will run us even to places of exhaustion where we don't choose to take a break, but our bodies just collapse, right? Because we run out of steam for a little while, and then we have that break and get right back to serving that parasite yet again. It's almost as if there's a mountain and we're cycling up the mountain, but there's no top, right? We just constantly are pedaling until we fall off the bike. Other times it's not that we collapse, right? It's that we maybe do get to some milestone. We get a big deadline accomplished, or we finally get to that vacation. And then our immune system, which has carried our body along all that time, takes a break, and then we end up being sick at the very time that we were hoping to have some rest and relaxation, right? Because that productivity parasite just takes and takes and takes. And sometimes we do get a break. We get sick, like Peter's mother-in-law, and we end up away from that. But how often in that space do we then think, gosh, all of the dishes are piling up, or the work at work is still going to be there when I get there, and I'm just going to be even more behind, right? That productivity parasite just giving us this sense of dread. Even when we stop working, right? We retire. Then sometimes I've seen this plenty with people who struggle, sometimes with purpose, like what is my purpose now? But underlying that purpose is often a question of doing. I used to produce, and whether that production was caring for children or making widgets in a factory, now in that space of retirement, what is my purpose and what am I doing, right? And if I'm not producing and contributing, then why am I still here? I've had that conversation with people in wheelchairs and hospice beds, wondering why God has not taken them out of the world because they aren't producing and contributing. This paradise of productivity undermines so much of our being as people so that we can't just be present. We always have to be doing. And in that way, it is a life-taking parasite, right? It takes and takes and takes. We are expected to give and give and give, and there is always more to do. And when there's not, we feel guilty because we're not producing something. But then we come to today's gospel, which is an entirely different story. There is always more to do in this story. Jesus encounters this whole town of people. After he heals Peter's mother-in-law, this whole town of people is there, and it doesn't tell us that he cast out every single demon and healed every single person. It says many, right? The whole town comes. He healed many people, not all. He cast out many demons, but not all. And then he takes some time apart, and then they come and find him. And Jesus says, well, let's go to the next town, right? There's always more for Jesus to do. But there is a difference between Jesus' gospel busyness, I want to call it, and the parasite of productivity that we live with, right? Because Jesus' gospel busyness is life-giving, whereas that parasite is life-taking. And we can track a little bit what happens in this story. Peter's mother-in-law has a break. Her journey is interrupted, right? And when Jesus heals her, it says she immediately began to serve them. I get the sense that she has a gift of hospitality. And it's not that she's just busy. She's serving them. She's equipping them, empowering them to send them off to the next step of their journey, providing them a safe place to gather and rest before they go on to that next part of the work that they are doing. That is a service, right? It's a relationship. It's this gift that she gives to them. It's not a busyness in the same way that that parasite is, because it takes place in this relationship with Jesus and with the disciples that follow him. Jesus himself then doesn't have a sickness, but he chooses to take a break. With all of the work that he's doing of healing and casting out of demons, he gets up early and goes and finds some time to be by himself. Someone once told me that that being selfless is not a helpful thing, right? If you're going to serve others and be in a relationship with others, you need to have a self. You don't need to be without a self or selfless. You need to be a whole self so that you can give to others. And what we find in Jesus is him going out into this place to be whole, to be filled back up perhaps. He's full of love, he's full of grace, he's full of compassion and mercy and patience and challenge and all of the things that Jesus brings to his journey. And it's those times of prayer perhaps that he refills so that he is a full, whole self that then goes out into the world to empty himself, right? He does give and give and give, but not in the same way that we give to a parasite. He gives and gives and gives out of a sense of gifts of grace and life that are given to us. He even gives to the point of death on a cross. And just when those around him thought his giving was done, he comes back in the resurrection to give them new life. This giving that Jesus does, this serving that he invites us into, is different from the giving that we give to a parasite, right? Because the parasite takes and takes and takes life, but Jesus gives and gives and gives life. So that Jesus then, in this space of life-giving work, right, takes this pause, grounds himself in prayer, fills himself up, and goes back out. Now, outside of this particular gospel story, we see something else that happens. Jesus is not productive. As he journeys from place to place, he doesn't have like Peter standing next to him with the clipboard checking off the metrics of how many people he's healed. If they were doing that, right, he would have set up shop and had 15 minutes for each appointment and make sure you crank those people through so that we can heal as many as possible. That's not how Jesus works. He's walking along from place to place and people cry out for mercy. They interrupt where he is going and he stops in that moment. He's not productive. He's present. And in being present, he is able to give that gift of life, whether that's in a healing, whether it's in a casting out of a demon, or simply acknowledging someone's presence and seeing them and hearing their pain and suffering and walking with them in that. So that we as the church then have that same invitation from Jesus, not to serve the parasite of productivity, but to serve perhaps the busyness of the gospel. Now, if you're not really paying attention, those two things can look very much the same. Earlier, I talked about pedaling up a mountain. When I was an intern in Colorado, there were mountains all around us, one of which was Mount Evans. It's a 14,000-foot mountain peak with a paved road that goes all the way up. And if you drive up Mount Evans, you will certainly see a cyclist or two pedaling up Mount Evans. And this is the thing, right? They have to keep pedaling. They have to be productive. If they stop, they'll start rolling back down the hill or they'll crash and fall off the bike, right? They have to keep going. There was a member of our congregation there who was an avid cyclist, and he certainly could do that work of pedaling up Mount Evans on his own, but he also had tandem bikes, and he participated in an organization that would take people who had limited sight or were entirely blind but wanted to cycle, and they would take those tandem bikes and bike up those very same mountains. And it's in that biking up those mountains that it looks the same as the one that's just pedaling, but it's different because it's a gift of service to this other person who could not do it on their own. It's a relationship they build. It's an opportunity to grow together in grace as they do the very same looking work. And so as we hear this passage today, in the context of a culture that has a parasite of productivity that will drain everything out of us, we are invited to enter into the very pattern that Jesus shows us, to ground ourselves in prayer, to understand that Sabbath taking and taking time apart to be filled up as people is part of our journey, but then to be busy with the gospel, right? Not just busy working, but busy serving others, building relationships, entering into those spaces where Jesus will continue to give us life and fill us up with this gift that we've already been given. Sometimes it may be the very same work that we do with the parasite, right? It's the stuff we do at our jobs and our schools and our neighborhoods. But when we come to it grounded in prayer and when we come to it understanding that interruptions can be spaces of grace, we find that that gift of life that Jesus has given us is right there with us in the busyness, so that it doesn't end up being that parasitic productivity taking of life, but the giving of the gift of life that Jesus has given us so that our gospel busyness can be both a gift to us, but a gift to the world as we go. Amen.